Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Empower Performance Podcast. Today's guest is Caleb Hanley of Handley Performance. He's a boxing strength and conditioning coach. Caleb, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and what you do.
Sweet, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, like you said, strength and conditioning coach. Normally working with boxers now, kind of branching out a little bit into some other combat athletes. Been doing strength conditioning for the last 6 years now. Went through the standard process of becoming a strength and conditioning coach, like most people do. Start as an athlete, realize that's probably not the route you're going to go down, or you're just not that good of an athlete. And then got into my undergrad exercise science, did some internships throughout, or as I was finishing actually, and then finished my master's, moved over to London for a little bit. And then as I kind of got back in, when was it, December last year, really started to knuckle down and working with boxers, but was doing it all throughout, but realized that's kind of the route I wanted to take. So this is where we're at now, just purely working for myself, working online with boxers, and that's been a challenging but enjoyable process.
Yeah, you do a great job. I don't say this like often, but like there's very few people on social media that I'll see every single post and I'm like, this is it. This is good content. It's educational. It's intelligent. You'll see some people you disagree with on some things, you agree with other things, but I don't think I've ever had like seen a post of yours where I was like, man, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like everything is just so great, and like I'm a huge fan. But the other
Thanks,
thing
man.
too, I think your training is good for all sports. Like if I didn't know you're a boxing coach, I just saw the training that you did. You have plyos, you have throws, compound movements, you do targeted accessory movements, you do conditioning. So it's not only good for boxing, it's good for all combat sports, but then even
Mm,
beyond that, it's good for just athletes in general. So I really appreciate that. If you want to speak
yeah.
about your kind of training philosophy a bit, please do.
Yeah, I missed the first part. It kind of broke up, but I'll talk to the second part of that of like,
Sure.
I guess, how strength and conditioning can be tailored to all sports using a very basic model, I guess. I think, I know when I was coming, I guess I still am coming up through the ranks of becoming a strength and conditioning coach, but as a very, fresh strength and conditioning coach, I saw so many. I think that this is kind of when this would have been like 4 years ago, kind of when S&C was becoming or promoted a lot more on Instagram. You'd see all these different exercises and you'd kind of think to yourself how this all comes together into a program. I think as you get more experience, you start to realize that pretty much every athlete, regardless of their sport, probably needs to get strong, probably needs to get powerful, and needs to improve every activity, conditioning, all that sort of stuff. I think where the differences lie is obviously like where they get injured, what specific qualities they really need to work on, and how we peak towards a competition. I think my philosophy kind of came from the earlier experiences I had as a strength and conditioning coach. Yeah, I was lucky enough to do a really good internship in Sydney with probably one of the better private facilities in Australia, called
Mhm.
Athletes Authority. So that really,
Oh,
I guess,
awesome. Yeah.
molded. Yeah, that really molded my coaching philosophy now, because they kind of had like what most private facilities would have, how they have like a team sport, or sorry, a
Mm.
field sport program, a combat sports program, um whether they're land based or in the water. The thing that I started to realize most is that most people are doing the exact same things. It's just making some very small changes to load and maybe some exercises depending on if they're in or out of season. So yeah, I think that kind of really molded my philosophy. And then I think, over the years, kind of refining how I program and seeing the results from just doing, the basics really, really well over the long term has moved me away from like, all right, every sport needs to have this very specific program. But like I said, it all just goes back to most athletes need to be fast, powerful, strong, well conditioned. It's just a matter of peaking those right qualities at the right time. But yeah, that's kind of how it's blended over the last 5 or 6 years.
So I really appreciate that answer. And my mind has gone back and forth on this throughout my coaching career myself. I work mostly Gen Pop. I come from a soccer background. I wanted to initially work with athletes, but I work with mostly adults, 40s, 50s, and all that. Some in their
Mm,
30s, and then I have a couple of like high school age athletes. And I program differently because I do have Gen Pop and I do have athletes, and then the athletes are different sports. But then there's also so many similarities amongst them. So you have to think: are you training for the individual? Are you training for the sport? Are you training for like your human qualities? Like what exactly are you training for? And early on, I was kind of like kind of confused and going back and forth, and then like what's most important. And the kind of rational answer that I came to, and I'm sure maybe you would agree with this, is that there's not one answer. You can have all of it, and it just depends on the
mm,
context of the
mm,
individual and the goals that they're trying to achieve. And when it comes to like specificity within a program, right now we're seeing a lot of GPP is everything. Keep it as general as
mm,
possible, and then just go practice your sport. And there's no room for specificity. And I think there is room for specificity. You can also go way too far there that you're not actually training the human being.
mm,
And there's no such thing as like a basketball specific squat versus a football specific squat. They're both squats. And that's why a lot of programs can look very similar. I think it really just comes down to the conversation with your athletes, doing some sort of an analysis, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, what they need to progress with. And then that actually makes the program writing so much easier the more context you have going in. But it's kind of the
mm,
information that drives the exercise selection. And without that, all programs will look very similar. So I like that you talk about how sport to sport, you might have a different injury um, accessory work, for example. Like I know you do a lot of neck work and a lot of
mm,
grip work for
mm.
boxing. But then, yeah, if you want to speak to kind of that balance between the human um, aspects, the general, the specific, and all that stuff, that's something I struggle with, but I feel more comfortable now than earlier.
Yeah, yeah, I'm the same. I definitely, as I was starting out, I was like, do I go super general? Do I go super specific? And I think it's just, two ends of the spectrum. And if you go one way too much, you're obviously not going to um, do the things you need to do for your athlete and get them the results that they need. So I think you kind of have to sit in that middle ground. Um, Whereas, like, you're not going to be completely general and not consider what the sport has to offer, but then you're also not going to be, so far to the specific realm where you might be, functional patterns or something like that. So I think you kind of have to find the middle ground for that. But I also think you have to consider that the individual specifically, because if you just think about the sport, it's still a little bit too general. You have to consider where the injury history of the athlete. You have to consider what they actually like doing. Like I could write what I would consider to be the best program ever, but if they don't like doing squats, then what's the point? That's where I think something for myself that's really changed for the last, I guess, 2 years, where I'm just working one on one with athletes, is that really trying to get down into what they actually enjoy. Because I think a good program is 60 to 70% of what they need, but then also, 30 to 40% of what they actually enjoy. Because you probably would have experienced before, especially with Gen Pop. Like I worked with Gen Pop whilst I was doing one of my internships. And if you're just giving them what you think they need without considering what they actually want, then, they're never going to come back to you and they're never going to get the results they kind of want. So it's kind of the blend of like what do they need versus what they want, and where are we heading with the program? What results are we trying to get out of it?
I was just having this conversation on my last episode. I don't know if you follow Pat Damiano. He's a
No, I
kettlebell
don't think
guy.
so. Yeah.
But you should look him up, he's great, but, he was saying that a lot of people criticize kettlebells as not being the most optimal tool for all these different things, and he says,
Mm,
"Sure, but I'm not selling it as the most optimal tool, I'm selling it for people that enjoy it and wanna get an adaptation with
mm,
it." And
yeah.
if you do the 80% best thing 100% of the time with 100% intent and consistency, or you do the 100% best thing, but you absolutely hate it and you do it 50% of the time, then which one is gonna yield better results? So I found that that was something that I definitely learned with Gen Pop is, um the adaptation is the most important thing, and you have to consider in your exercise selection the enjoyment factor. Even if it sounds stupid when you first get into training, you have to
Mm,
consider, is someone really going to do this consistently and are they going to do it with high effort? Because that's actually what's going to yield the adaptation in the long term.
yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm I'm still not fully around to the idea of boxers having to run. I think boxers just don't have to. But if a boxer comes to me and they're like, I really enjoy running, like it's whether it's doing anything for my conditioning or not, I just enjoy it. I'm not going to be the one to say don't go and do that, because you know obviously you're trying to push certain adaptations, but there's a large mental side of training that a lot of people enjoy the process of just going out for a run or whatever it might be. So that's kind of one thing I'm slowly, very slowly coming to terms with. Like, if it might not be the most optimal way, but if they enjoy doing it, then hopefully I can just guide them in the right way to what we should be doing, rather than just like what most boxers would do would be like two slow runs, maybe some interval run, maybe just go for a 10K for the sake of going for a 10K. So yeah, my thoughts around all of this has definitely changed over the last years, but I think that's what happens with more and more experience. You kind of refine your process and you refine what you think should and shouldn't be into a program, and how that kind of plays into what they like and what they don't like doing.
I'm glad you mentioned running. Something that I had later on in the in my list of questions. It's probably the most ingrained in boxing kind of thing you can do for conditioning. I don't think there's really a
Mm,
debate for that. I've seen you do a lot of assault bike work, which I love and I hate. I love it because it's effective. I hate it because if you do it, it's the worst thing you can possibly do. It just sucks. Um, and you do a lot of like I saw you did some stuff with where you're actually measuring people's heart rate. You're tracking their heart rate and seeing the improvement and letting that drive your conditioning. So it's actually a more intentional thing than just going for a run. Now, if someone hates the bike and they never do it, and the only thing they'll do for conditioning is running, running is better
mm,
than sitting on the couch and being totally unconditioned. But it doesn't
mm,
mean that it's the number one thing, and that's why I understand your kind of argument against it is that it's a lot of wear and tear on the body. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you'd rather people spend their energy on activities that would yield better results, whether that's strength and conditioning or actual boxing skill performance or sparring, um, or it would be the assault bike where it might be just 10 minutes, but 10 minutes will cook you as opposed to an hour beating up your tendons and all that stuff,
mm.
just hitting the road.
Yeah, for sure. I know I post so much about how much I think running is bullshit, but you know, it's been ingrained into boxing culture for forever. So it's hard to say don't do it. I think the only way that I can convince people otherwise is, continuously show results that point to other methods being more effective. So yeah, I think that's a continued process. I don't think it'll ever completely change. Again, I think you need
Sure.
to consider what's ingrained into the sport and what is the norms, and then just try to adapt to that. But you know, for most of my guys that aren't, or doing very, 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 very little running, and their main conditioning stimulus is coming from the assault bike, like they're getting really good results, like um, showing improvements in their sparring, when they're doing pads, in their actual testing that we do. I think it's probably a little bit of a bias on my end, but the longer I do it and the more I prescribe it, the more I'm like, okay, this is actually a really good method. And I like, thanks to I did uh, Andrew Usher's Andrew Ushers and James from Sweet Science of Fighting. They did a mentorship on conditioning, which was really good, really valuable. Definitely opened my eyes to more effective means of conditioning boxers, because yeah, if you're doing a sport like boxing that requires so much technical skill, it just, for me, doesn't make sense to go out and spend upwards of 3 to 4 hours a week running when you could be spending that time honing in
Sure.
on your skills. I think kind of like a 10 to 15% max of your total training time should come from conditioning. And for most boxers, if they're going out and running 3 to 4, sometimes 5 times a week, then for me, that just kind of takes away from the main thing, which is obviously going to be the boxing.
I completely agree with you. I find that so I have a client who's a high school wrestler. He was a state runner-up last year, and wrestlers also have the idea that they have to run to be super in shape. And so when I train him, it's an hour-long session. I'll dedicate 5-10 minutes to the conditioning. I'll let him be
Mm,
on his feet and do some running, but I'll try to do interval-based running in a way that it would be essentially like the fan bike. He doesn't have a fan bike at his gym. I drive to his house to train him. So I'll give him shuttle runs, I'll give him the hill, or I'll give him tempo runs, and then you just drive enough intensity. It's basically kind of the best of both worlds, or the in between, I guess, is what I'd say, where you're not actually beating yourself up with these long, steady state runs,
mm,
but you're still getting kind of a an interval stimulus. And I find that I was a soccer player, so um, I always thought I had like really great conditioning. You run for 90 minutes, you can do about 6 miles a match. You have these intervals. But then when I actually started combat sports about a year ago. So
Yeah,
I
I think
do
I've seen you
Muay,
post about it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, so I do a little bit of Muay Thai, a bit of Jiu-Jitsu, one wrestling class a week, one MMA class a week. Holy crap, like the conditioning is just totally different, and it took
so
forever for
different.
me to
Hey,
get used to it. Oh my
yeah.
gosh, like so I would say with the grappling sports, it feels more, at least jujitsu at times, it feels more isometric tension. Feels like
Mm.
your muscles will exhaust faster, but then like boxing and Muay Thai and all that stuff feels more cardio driven. There's still a muscular element. I mean, it's gonna be hard to hold your hands up after a couple rounds of pads. Your arms get tired. But I feel
Plus,
that's
you're
more,
thinking about not getting punched in the face, which is
yeah, yeah.
very
Yeah, huge.
cognitively draining. So it's
Yeah.
tough. Yeah.
But, the reason why it was such a difficult transition for me is because typically you think of high intensity as, short duration when it comes to conditioning, and you think of lower intensity, longer duration, and it feels like high intensity, medium to long duration. So it's really hard to keep up. You have to be very efficient in your movements,
Mm.
to conserve
Yeah.
energy.
And that's why I always go back to technical training being the most important because like if you're solely just focusing on conditioning and doing these runs or whatever, there's such a technical component to boxing that if your technique isn't on point, then that could be a reason you're gassing out, not necessarily your cardiovascular adaptations. It could be that you're very tense when you're sparring. It could be that you're focusing on too much of one thing. It could be all these other factors that aren't actually to do with your cardiovascular system. So that's why I'm like, if you can spend the smallest amount of time just doing conditioning, whilst also spending time or the most amount of time doing your technical training, I think that's going to blend together to produce a much more conditioned athlete for a combat sport rather than just doing this very general, long, time consuming type of conditioning.
Do you feel comfortable speaking to the, skill development side of boxing?
A little bit, probably not so much. I mean, I've been boxing for like a year and a half now, 2 years. When I was in London, I was just doing a session a week, and then now that I'm back in Australia, I do 3 sessions a week with one session of jujitsu. But um, yeah, I try to steer away from the technical side of things. I do prescribe some heavy bag type work or type conditioning, mostly for guys that will feel like their arms get super heavy because the standard thing in boxing would to be they still do like at my gym and some of the gyms I've gone to when they're doing heavy bag conditioning, it'd be like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off as hard as you can possibly go,
Mhm.
or these random intervals that have kind of just been passed down from the coach beforehand without actually considering what you're trying to improve in that sense. So I don't touch too much on the technical side of things, but when I do, it'll just be some specific heavy bag intervals and give them, some combinations to throw in this amount of time with this amount of intensity just to really drive some sort of adaptation rather than the traditional approach, which would be, yeah, like I said, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off as hard as you can go, or 10 seconds on, 40 seconds, whatever they do. But yeah, that's about as far as the technical side of things that I go with.
The reason why I was asking is because, I imagine just like the strength and conditioning world around boxing, the skill side can be full of a lot of great stuff that are high ROI and then a lot of fluff and a lot of filler stuff. And I would imagine that the highest ROI stuff you can probably do for boxing performance is sparring, shadow boxing, and maybe like some heavy bag work. And then you see a lot of like kind of fluff drills in there. Of
Yeah.
course, you can use the specialty bags and all that stuff, but I don't think you should be dedicating the majority of your time to them. You could be a speed bag pro and then be a terrible boxer, for example. Um, but then I also find that uh, there's sometimes in boxing a blend of skills and conditioning, and I find it just waters down both things. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot. I'm curious if there's anything you've seen that kind of grinds your gears or that you wish didn't really exist in that space.
Yeah, I've had a few of my athletes within the last few weeks ask about the general, like their boxing gym will offer these general conditioning classes, which would typically be like an F45 type class where it's like a hit class with some boxing blended with some circuit style training with some med balls and all that sort of stuff. And for me, if you're if you're an amateur somewhat serious about boxing, I just can't see what that is trying to achieve. I think most people, if they really want to, can make someone tired, but actually sitting down and figuring out what you're trying to get out of a session is probably a little bit harder. And so that would probably be one of the biggest things for me is just, yeah, when boxing gyms offer these fight conditioning classes, which are just designed to make people feel
Right.
incredibly tired without actually thinking about how that is that going to transfer to their boxing performance. And for me, 9 times out of 10, it's probably not. But it kind of goes back to the culture of boxing, which is, train as hard as you can, as long as you can, until you break down, basically.
That was something I learned early on. I guess a little bit too late in my college soccer career was I thought more was better. I thought if I do more individual sessions, more gym sessions, then I would accelerate my growth and beat out
Mm,
every other player on the team. And then I show up to the training sessions and the games fatigued and my performance would be lesser than it would be if I had like the right balance. And so I had to learn the hard way that more is not better, better is better. And that's where specificity becomes important because anybody can write a workout to make you tired. And that's
mm,
not the skill of a good session. A good session should make you to some extent tired, right? You don't have to crush somebody, but performance will dip if you apply stimulus. That's known. Um, but the idea is, where's your starting point? Where's your end goal? And how do we sustainably creep you along in that direction?
mm,
And so my MMA class is located in the back of a CrossFit box, and we usually don't mix with them, which is great. And
mm.
then in the last MMA class, they had us do 15-minute, like a 15-minute AMRAP with a CrossFit box. And it was just 20 step overs on a box with a 50-pound dumbbell, and then 200-meter run, as many rounds as you can. And so, like, we're cooked before we even
Yeah.
do, you've done over 100 step ups and all that stuff before you even do any skill work. And then your skill work is 2 hours. And then you have DOMs for the next 3 days. And then that affects everything else for the rest of the week. So it's not intelligent in the slightest. And I'm not trying to shit on CrossFit because it's too easy to do that. I
Mm,
think CrossFit has some positive things that they've done for the training world. Certainly some negative things that they've done. Um, and I don't want to harp on them too much because it feels unfair to do that. But that was one thing I was disappointed in with that style of training is the goal is not improvement. The goal is like challenge and pain and soreness and fatigue.
mm. I think they're like the more that I'm around combat sports, I think there is some like a very small amount of value for that. I think like if you're competing in any combat sports, you have to have some level of discipline to basically embrace the suck. Like, but I think it could just be done a little bit better. I've within the last 5 years of working with boxers, you come across some pretty crazy things that coaches will prescribe their boxers to do, whether it's, before a session or after a session or on their day off or whatever it might be. And yeah, it goes back to the culture of boxing, but I think I mean, my approach with it is just trying to give them the information they need to make it a little bit better. And I think that's probably one of my biggest challenges for the guys that I work with is trying to give them enough to create the adaptations that we're trying to achieve, but also not give them too much whilst also factoring into account their sparring, whatever their coach is giving them to do, because 9 times out of 10, a lot of boxers will be getting a conditioning program from their coach. So it's trying to work around that. That's probably the biggest challenge is trying to manage their overall training load rather than just
Mhm.
seeing it from a strength and conditioning perspective, seeing what they're doing within their boxing sessions. Are they doing these, class conditioning sessions? Is their coach giving them some crazy stuff to do outside, whatever it might be? But yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges of working with boxers and then combat athletes in general is how is all of their training load coming together to kind of, um, push them in the right direction.
Yeah, so I agree with you, and it's interesting you say that because with my wrestler in particular, I learned that it is very difficult to write a perfect program for him because I can't
Mm,
take into account when writing the program what everything else in his life will entail,
yeah.
the competitions that he'll have, how many matches he'll have. His high school coach, so he does high school and club wrestling. His high school coach during the season made them do 2-a-days up until postseason, which is just like insane. And then his club coach would have them do 2-hour resting sessions, which is fine. But then their buyout, their finisher was 100 pull-ups. and there's no kid that can do 100 pull-ups, so they just start like
Yeah,
basically bicep curling each other with assistants, and like he has
yeah,
DOMs for a week, and it's like, what am I supposed to do with this kid? You know, who's being murdered by his coaches in the name of mental toughness or
yeah,
conditioning. You know, and it's
yeah.
just not
The
it.
good old
And
mental toughness argument is always
yeah,
funny, but that's for another time.
yeah. I think toughness comes from overcoming challenges on a repeated basis. And you can just do that with a good program. That if you push
Mm,
someone a little bit beyond their limits on a consistent basis, that builds confidence. I don't like this whole, performative confidence thing that you see people have, where it's like, oh, if I do a power pose for 5 minutes, I'll be confident. Fake it till you make it. It's like, or do the work so
yeah,
that you're good enough at the thing that you have confidence from experience that you can do the
yeah.
thing. So,
I also think it's very, very context specific or context dependent. Like, you see a lot of combat athletes being like, I'm training for mental toughness by getting up at 5 a.m. to go for a run. And I think there's probably some value to that, but also
mm.
it's completely different when you get in the ring and someone punches you in the face, or you're in like the last round of a fight and you're almost being knocked out and you're like, oh, well, I'm glad I went for that 5 a.m. run. You're probably thinking to yourself, well, I wish I boxed more.
So, speaking a little bit along those lines, there's a delusion for people who haven't fought watching fighters fight and thinking, I can do that. And then you talked about getting punched in the face. And so I went to a boxing and Muay Thai smoker with some of my childhood friends who don't train. And we had a great time watching all these exhibition fights and all that. And then when we were leaving, one of my buddies decided to say that one of these guys lost. And he said some unsavory things about the guy who lost. I said, there's not one person that stepped in that ring that's like not brave and tough and strong and courageous. They got in
Mm.
front of 200 people shirtless and risked putting their body on the line. Some of them got their, noses broken and all this stuff. I'm like, we're sitting in an air conditioned car. We're going to go grab like a quick Indian meal after this, like
Yeah.
we got it good. So I'm like, I feel like sometimes people need a good punch in the face to experience a little
Yeah.
bit of mental toughness. But yeah.
100%.
Um,
100%.
so why do you think someone should take up boxing or combat sports?
Uh, I mean, the reason I got into it was because my old boss, he said come along to a jiu-jitsu class, and originally I fucking hated it. I thought it was the worst thing ever. Maybe just because I got ragdolled by everyone, and there was people that were, I mean, I'm not big by any means, but there was people much smaller than me just throwing me around. It was also gi, which I don't do any of anymore. I just do no
Oh
gi.
yeah. Yeah.
And I'd done a bit of boxing before that, but at that point I was just doing jiu-jitsu. And then, yeah, whilst I was in London, got more into boxing and now do, like I said, 3 sessions of boxing, 1 session of jiu-jitsu. But the main reason I enjoyed it is just learning something new again and being competitive. Like I had stopped playing, I grew up playing rugby league and then
Okay.
stopped playing when I was 18 or 19, I think. Yeah. And so I didn't pick up, like from there, I was pretty much just doing my uni degree in exercise science. And I've always loved lifting. I've always loved being in the gym, like from about 13 or 14. I was in the gym, which has been amazing. But after the age of 19 till about 24 or 25, yeah, 24, I wasn't doing anything really competitive. It was just go to the gym, lifting, and I kind of missed that aspect of training. And, growing up, I always loved being competitive. So for me, getting back into something that is somewhat competitive, but also just
Uh-huh.
learning something new. I think as strength and conditioning coaches, we can get so hung up on the X's and O's of a strength and conditioning program without considering, how much mental effort it takes to learn a new skill and how that can kind of blend into your overall training load and recovery and everything like that. So that has been one of the main reasons that I've been, enjoying jujitsu and boxing so much is just learning a new skill. I think it's yeah, as we get older, it's something we kind of miss out on. So it's been fun, but very, very frustrating at times.
Everything you said, I 100% agree with. That's been my experience as well. I was an athlete. I graduated college at 21, and until 27, I didn't have any sport to train for. And the gym on its own just wasn't engaging enough for me.
Yeah,
And then my wife is having a baby at the end of the year, and I just thought I have to be able to defend my family because I'm also not a big guy. And so I tried these classes, and yeah, I got ragdolled and all that stuff. But it was one of these things where like I don't like to to like shy away from a challenge or something like that. So I
Mm,
just stuck with it. And, I've been seeing some growth over a year, and I know that it's not like I'm a lethal weapon or anything right now, but like in my mind, it's okay to suck for the first few years. It's natural, right?
mm,
And I
yeah.
just have like
Well, it
this
makes you,
mindset of what will I be in 10 years, you know?
yeah, it makes you realize uh, how shit you are at fighting, and how if it
Oh
actually came
gosh.
down to it, it
Yeah.
would just not go well. Like there's guys at my gym again who are much smaller than me, but have been doing it for very lot longer than I have, and can just absolutely destroy me if they want to, both in boxing and jiu-jitsu. But yeah, just going back to what you were saying, how you and your buddies went and watched the fight, like people love to talk shit, and people, especially on the internet, love to say all
Mm,
these things. But I don't know. It's hard to say unless you've actually trained for one, let alone been in a fight in a ring or on a mat or whatever it might be.
mhm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's fun to see people in their first class. And then the other thing too is I've personally found that class to class, it messes with your confidence a little bit because you might have one
Mm.
session where it goes really well, and you're like,
Yeah,
man, I'm getting better at this. And then the very next session, you get absolutely handled. You find a different training partner, and they put you in your place. And it's like, all right, I should just never mess with anybody on the streets because you don't know who knows what, you know?
yeah. You can ask my girlfriend about that. Every time I come home from boxing sparring, I'm like, "Well, I am the worst person on planet Earth at boxing." And then the next session, I come back and I'd be like, "I hit this, and it was the best thing ever." So, yeah, she can vouch for me on that.
Yeah, Monday night, in my jujitsu class, it's 45 minutes of skill and then 15 minutes of rolling. And the 4 combinations of how that class can go is I had a good skill portion and a good, rowing portion, bad in both or good in one and bad in the other, both kind of
Yeah,
combinations. Then I had one where it was I couldn't get the skill down. It was some sort of a leg lock entry, and, like, I just couldn't understand it. And then I was paired with partners who were just more experienced and larger than me, and I just got
yeah,
ragdolled, and I came
yeah,
home and I felt like, you know, bottom of the valley. And then the next day at MMA, one of the guys said that he was, entering a jiu-jitsu competition and he wanted to roll with me because I was the best in the class, which speaks to the difference between specialist and generalist. And then, I
mm.
rolled with him at the end, and I submitted him, like, twice in, like, 3 minutes, and I was like, "Man, am I good at
Yeah, yeah.
jiu-jitsu?"
Confidence
The
goes
answer is
way back
no,
up.
but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I know that feeling all
um,
too well.
going in a slightly different direction. Actually, we're talking about cross training a little bit. Do you find that there could be value in cross training for boxers? I guess both from a physical side and then also from a technical side.
Cross training in what aspect? In like training in other sports?
Yeah, yeah. So, like for example, I think Usyk mentioned that he would do some wrestling to help with his clinch,
Mm.
and Lomachenko
Yeah, yeah,
danced to work with his footwork.
yeah, yeah. I did a post on that a couple weeks back about this video of Loma doing some wrestling training with his dad and another fighter, and like I think there is like a fair bit of value, especially if like any same as Muay Thai, like there's a lot of clinching involved, and if you can naturally just control someone else's body more than the other person, especially in that clinch position, then you're going to set yourself up for a far better, whether you're setting up for some offense or even some defense. Like I think Lomachenko is a perfect example of that. One of my guys actually said he's going to start doing a wrestling class once per week. So I think when you're specifically trying to enhance a skill that is present within the sport, I think there is value in that. Um, a lot of boxers are starting to go towards swimming for their conditioning, which I think there's pros and cons towards, but I think if it's it, I feel like a lot of people are doing that just because other boxers are doing that now without thinking about their overall training load. Again, that the stuff we were talking about before, swimming is very arm dominant and is very heavy on the shoulders. So for boxers that might have a history of those sort of injuries might not be the best option. But I think if you're cross training to a skill that, like I said, is present within the sport, which wrestling, albeit you're not trying to take someone down, but being able to manipulate and control someone else's body weight, I think there is massive value in that.
Mhm. I 100% agree, and I find that that's maybe the only advantage that I have sometimes going from one specific sport to another.
Mm,
Um, is that maybe I go and we have a Muay Thai focus session at the MMA gym, and then I feel better pushing and pulling because of my grappling experience with the wrestling
yeah.
class or the jiu-jitsu class. So I've always been that way by nature where I was a midfielder when I played soccer because I didn't have any overwhelming strengths, but I also didn't have any overwhelming weaknesses. And
Mm,
even when it comes to training, I like the general side of training and working with Gen Pop of all different ages and abilities and preferences. And then same with different athletes because I get to see, I'm not going to be a specialist necessarily, but I get to see where things connect. And I find that that's actually what I can leverage.
yeah, 100%. When you find that some skills have that carryover, and then you can realize that that skill might be, or that specific position is present within boxing the same as it is in wrestling or whatever it might be, I think overall you'll be a better athlete to be able to recognize those specific positions. I'm the same. Like when it comes to boxing, anytime we come into some sort of clinch position because I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I obviously lift a fair bit. Like I'm probably going to be stronger than most boxers in the gym, so I can easily move them around. But on the speed and technical side of things, they get me every time. So I think there's value in both. Um, you know, purely focusing on the sport, but also having that carryover from other sports.
I totally agree. Switching it up just a little bit, are you a big fan of the Rocky and the Creed movies?
I honestly not really. Like I remember watching them a little bit as a kid, but haven't watched anything to do with Rocky or the Creed for God knows how for a while.
Because I think that's what most people have in their minds when it comes to boxing strength and conditioning. So I feel like
Yeah.
maybe that's what you're competing against in terms of trying to break the notion of what it's supposed to be. You're not necessarily lifting a log over your head or trying to catch a
Yeah.
chicken.
Don't get me wrong, there is definitely some aspects that boxers will bring up, like should I go into the woods and chop wood, or you know, goes back to the running and everything like that. So I think it doesn't make that big of an influence, but I do get the question here and there of, like I said, should I chop wood or should I throw med balls or whatever it might be. Yeah, it's always funny when that comes up.
hmm Um, okay, so then another thing is, are there any major lessons you learned along the way with this journey of boxing strength and conditioning,
Any
or
major
anything you changed your
lessons?
mind on?
Yeah. I mean, conditioning is a big one. I think just over the course of the last 5 years of figuring out how to get the most out of a specific session. And like when I first started, that's when probably when zone two, everyone was talking like raving about zone two and um, the benefits of that. But I think the more that I've become educated on the topic and actually implemented it into the programs that I write, I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've changed my mind on. I change my mind on things daily, like whether to include loaded jumps, whether to not include loaded jumps, whether to include med ball work or not include med ball work, how long a session should be. Should I reduce that? Should I take that out? So I'm always changing my mind on things, but I think conditioning has been one of the biggest things I've changed my mind on. And I think for the better, I hope anyway.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, This is a something that's very unique to combat sports I was gonna ask you about because you say you worked at Athletes Authority, which has a huge team sport component.
Mm,
Periodization is kind of a tricky thing in the context of combat sports because you have an inconsistent number of fights during the year. If you have a bad loss, you might be out a little bit longer. If you have a good win streak, you want to keep it going. You don't always know how many fights. You don't always know when the fights are going to be. It might be set up a month earlier or later than you had anticipated. And then the camps might be different lengths. So how do you deal with the fact that there's no true off season, preseason, that there's no traditional periodization? How do you cope with that?
yeah, I'm gonna plug my own YouTube because I'm actually about to drop a YouTube video on this soon, so stay tuned for that. But I pretty much like it's a little bit different for amateurs compared to the pros. Like the pros, you will most of the time get a pretty decent prep period, and you'll know a fair amount in advance when they are going to fight. Like most guys that I'm working with will know that they're going to fight within 6 to 8 weeks. But the good thing about
Okay.
working with um, boxers long term is that you can kind of develop the strength and work capacity, and if they need to put on a bit of muscle over the year, and then we can kind of narrow our focus if a fight does get announced. So I think that's probably one of my biggest arguments for boxers is doing strength and conditioning year round. So you're not having to only use that 6 or 8 week camp to just focus on, very basic qualities. Um, But for the amateurs are a little bit harder. Basically, we look at if we know when their bigger schedules are or their bigger competitions are. So for like in
Mm,
Australia, that would be states, nationals, maybe Commonwealth trials, all that sort of stuff. That will be their big event that we're working towards. And then if they're having kind of those fights in between, we'll kind of have a taper or a bit of a deload, but we won't change things too much because it'll be a similar approach to how you would approach a team sport athlete, right? Like you know that they've got their finals at the end of the year, but they're going to
sure.
be playing week in, they're going to be playing their week in, week out. So we might just adjust depending on how they're feeling on the week or whatever it might be. But I like to use like a vertical integration model where we're just kind of developing all things all the time. We'll kind of shift the volumes depending on where they're at, how far away they are from a fight, if they're in or out of camp. So a few things to consider. I think working with or planning for a pro is much easier because they have that specific date. Sometimes they might have to back it up within 4 weeks, but to be honest, that's not too bad because if they do have to back up a fight, they can easily just jump straight back into it, especially if they have a very short fight, like the fight doesn't go the distance. I had one guy that we were prepping for, I think about 12 weeks. And then he knocked the guy out within 2 minutes of the first round. So it's like, how much fatigue did he even get from that? You know, he probably got more fatigue from just the
The
camp
training.
rather than the
Oh,
fight
yeah, yeah,
itself.
yeah. Hmm.
And so he's probably already primed and ready to go. So all we have to do is just dial back. And then he got had a fight the 4 weeks later. So we just had to dial back and, make sure he's maintained what he developed the last 12 weeks. Um, but yeah, that's why I'm a big proponent of boxers not just coming or going to a strength and conditioning coach and saying, I've got a 10-week camp. I just need to do it here. So doing it year round so you can actually have some time developed to or put towards strength, like I said, some hypertrophy, some work capacity. So when you actually do get into that camp period, you can mostly focus on those qualities that are going to be more um, present in boxing. So like speed, reactivity, all those sort of things. But the general process is making sure we're doing everything year round, just kind of alternating those volumes, which most S&C coaches would be doing.
Hmm. Um, so I really appreciate that answer. I find that uh, there's a good nuance. The main takeaway I had is if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Yeah,
But within that context as well, there is a natural fluctuation. You're going to taper right before competition. I imagine you give people a little bit of a recovery window after a hard fight or something like that before you start to ramp back
mm,
up the intensity. So there
yeah,
still is, I imagine, the natural fluctuations that you'd see in traditional periodization, but you just have to generally stay ready throughout the year so that you're not, starting from zero every single time, and it's a much
yeah,
harder camp.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
do you mind me? Do you mind me asking you about weight cutting? Do you focus on the nutrition side with athletes, and how may weight cutting affect your actual training programs?
Yeah, I try to stay away from that. Most of the guys that I work with will work with the dietitian, so they generally will look after that. Um, Typically, like for most of them, the major, or for the pros anyway, their major weight cutting will come, in that week of the fight. So that'll come in with, reducing carbs, reducing fiber, doing a water load for those pros. But for the amateurs that are kind of having that prolonged weight cut into a bigger competition, that can be a bit trickier, especially if we're trying to target some strength adaptations. If you've ever done it yourself, when you're cutting weight and when you're in a deficit, you obviously don't have as much energy. So when you're getting into the gym and trying to push the intensity on some lifts or whatever it might be, it can be a bit trickier. So yeah, I wouldn't say I have a set process for that. It more just comes down to like when I'm chatting to them, how are you feeling on a weekly basis? I think if you're planning too far in advance for a combat athlete, you're probably not doing them the service that you could be. I think having that constant communication is key because, if I plan so far in advance, but their weight cut is going not as good as it expected, maybe we have to shift a bit of focus with their program. Maybe we have to pull out some volume. Maybe they're a bit more fatigued than what you'd expect. So yeah, it's kind of a more reactive approach rather than planning too far in ahead and being like, this is how you're going to feel here and here and here. Just making sure that each week we're touching base to be like, all right, how are you feeling if you are cutting weight? But yeah, generally for the pros, it'll be week of the fight that where they'll cut the most amount of weight, and yeah, we're pretty much just focusing on recovery that week. most of my guys will do a primer the week of the fight, and then yeah, they'll be good to go.
I find that weight cutting is actually one of the most strenuous and dangerous aspects of the fighting world in general.
Yeah.
I find that forever people thought the more weight you cut, the more weight you can gain back, and the bigger the advantage and all that stuff. Speaking from personal experience, the difference of 5 pounds when I'm fighting somebody isn't really that great. I'll
Mm,
notice if it's 10, 20, 30 pounds and all that. Um, I think it's better if people generally have smaller weight cuts or fight at their normal weight, so that they can actually feel energized and not even just physiologically fresh, but neurologically fresh going into a fight, as opposed to like I don't know if you ever saw TJ Dillashaw lost like 25 pounds and gained it back in like a 24-hour. Well, the gaining the back came in like a 24-hour span. He looked like he was dying.
yeah.
Um, he looked like he was like genuinely sick and all that stuff. And it just, I can't imagine it's healthy long term, mentally, physically. Your organs need sustenance and fat to be supported. And so,
Mm,
like my wrestler example, he told me yesterday morning that he has to lose 10 pounds by Friday, which is like tomorrow, which is like, right, well, you're already pencil thin. I don't know. You're going to have to
yeah.
do some crazy things that you see people doing. It's not healthy for some of these people to develop eating disorders, take laxatives, make themselves throw up, put on the sweat bags, and punish themselves in the sauna or the hot tub or something. It's definitely a dangerous thing. And then the other thing too is sometimes, he's trying to decide at the beginning of season if he's going to fight 3 pounds under his current weight or 8 pounds under his current weight. And my recommendation is 3 pounds, one, so that the cuts aren't so drastic, but also you're
Mm,
in puberty. By the end of the season, you're going to be naturally bigger, and those weight cuts are going
mm.
to be even more drastic when you get into the states, which is actually the period when you want to grow your freshest. Um, it's my 2 cents on weight cuts.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider. That's for sure. I think a lot of guys are thrown into it, especially if they're younger. If they start combat sports from a younger age, they think that they have to be reaching these certain weights. And like you said, who's to know the long term effects of that? I mean, there's probably some research to show that, but yeah, the long term effects of weight cutting from a younger age as you grow into adulthood and how that affects your hormones and your physiology. So yeah, it's I guess combat sports isn't really for the faint-hearted, is it? But yeah, add
No,
that
it's crazy.
weight cutting
Yeah.
perspective on top of that. It makes it a tough thing to go through.
So, in a slightly different direction, what feels like a win in your job? I would say really quickly that for me, I imagine it's a different thing since I work with mostly Gen Pop. If somebody says that, they were able to put on their socks and shoes and pants without leaning or on anything or sitting down for the first time in forever, that's actually like a really good feeling. But since you work with athletes who compete, I feel that their results are maybe more significant than their day to day feelings or something like that. But please share what gets you going in your job.
For me, the main thing is if they're actually feeling like the things that I'm giving them is giving them transfer to boxing. So, like my programs will always start with some testing. So we look at like strength, power, conditioning, and I think it's nice as the coach to see that the numbers go up because you're like, well, I'm doing my job. But if you don't see the numbers go up, but they feel, stronger in the ring, or they feel like their gas tank is outlasting their opponent, or, they're faster, their footwork feels like it's better, then that's probably the major win. I think we can, as strength and conditioning coaches, get very hung up on a squat numbers going up, is their bench press going up, or whatever metric you're looking at. So I think the main thing that I'm looking for is how is the things that we're doing actually transferring to the boxing and their ring performance? Because yeah, I'll get my guys messaging me and be like, oh, I, you know, did 3 rounds of sparring today and I didn't gas once, or I was easily able to bully the other person I was boxing, or whatever it might be. I think that's the biggest thing for me, rather than just being like, yeah, their squat numbers went up, their broad jump went up, or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's always a highlight of the day when I get those types of messages.
I find that it's interesting you say that because in the college strength and conditioning world, particularly in the United States, and maybe it's changing now, but a lot of these guys came from like powerlifting backgrounds and more maybe Olympic lifting backgrounds and sometimes bodybuilding. And it wasn't necessarily the most athletic training you could hope for. And they just wanted to get people as strong as possible. And all they cared about was the before and after shirtless photos to show muscle mass gains
Yeah.
or the sheet of their pre testing and their post testing to show the
Mm,
gains they made. And I think what's truly the most important thing is um, availability is number one. Can people be healthy enough for the demands of their sport in a long season? You can be the most jacked and shredded and well conditioned, explosive person ever. You're constantly getting hurt. It serves you no purpose in the context of sports. Um, and so, yeah, availability is the number one thing to look at, I think. But then also just how someone feels, how they perform, their confidence, and all that stuff. As opposed to you prioritize the lifting, they do the lifting because you screamed at them, but then they might feel beat down, go into a game not fresh, get hit
mm.
hard or something like that, and get injured and all that. So, I do like that. That's your priority as opposed to what I think it's been for a long time, which is just the before and after to justify my paycheck.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's kind of the bonus of working for yourself. You don't have to really justify it to anyone. You can just be like, is the athlete feeling better? Are they feeling like they're getting the most out of the program and seeing that transfer? Because I think, probably traditionally it's been you're having to answer to a head coach. Is the head coach happy with how their lifting numbers, their speed numbers, all those sort of things going up? Whereas I think that's kind of an advantage of working for yourself. Kind of probably is a disadvantage as well, but you don't have to answer to a head coach. You obviously have to justify. I do speak to a lot of my coaches, a lot of my boxers coaches, and you do have to justify why you're doing certain things. But the main thing I'm looking for is, are they feeling better in the ring? Are they feeling better um, on pads when they're doing bag work? Because if they're not, then maybe we do have to shift the focus. And sometimes that might mean that the metrics we're looking at are going up, but it's not pushing them in the direction that they need to go.
Do you mind me asking what specific metrics you like to look at?
Yeah. So I look at a few different things, but because all of my guys are online, I try to keep it super, super basic. So we basically look at for power, we look at a med ball throw, a broad jump, and a triple hop. For strength, we just look at a 3RM for trap bar, deadlifts, bench press, and then AMRAP pull-ups. And then for our conditioning tests, we do a time to exhaustion test, basically just ramping it up. And then we do a 30-second repeat sprint test. That one I got off Andrew Rusher in that mentorship that I was talking about before, and basically just looking at their heart rate kinetics. So how well they're able to get the heart rate going, how well they're able to recover, and then that kind of informs my conditioning for their upcoming block.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the post that you have one of your posts that you have pinned, and it's 30 seconds as fast as possible, 60 seconds rest, and 30 seconds as fast as possible. And you track the heart rate
It's
recovery,
brutal.
correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's basically like doing a Wingate back to back with not as much
yeah.
recovery as what most people would give them, but it does give some good data. So yeah, like I said, we just look at as soon as they start exercising, is their heart rate able to get going to reflect that increased energy demand, and then as soon as they stop exercising, are they able to recover post that before repeating that effort straight away? But yeah, if you've ever done it, it sucks.
I sometimes will have people like when I give them kind of an intro to sprints on the bike, we'll give them like 5 rounds of 10 seconds on, 50 seconds off. And that first round, they are way too confident. And I tell
Yeah,
them after round two, you're gonna think you're dead. So,
yeah.
enjoy it. It's only 50 total seconds of work and 5 minutes. It really doesn't sound that bad on paper. But if you're ripping
Mm,
the bike and we look at the watts on the bike and we just try to break the record each round, I mean, if you're really ripping the bike as hard as you can, it's
yeah.
just awful.
Yeah. I often get people messaging me being like, that's not enough time for, developing a fighter for 10 rounds or 8 rounds. I'm like, well, no, you're not conditioning to meet or to just do the length of the rounds. You're doing the
Sure.
conditioning to create these adaptations, whether at the muscular level or at the central level. I think that's where a lot of boxers kind of get caught up with thinking why running might be the best option, because it's if I've got a 8 round fight, I'm going to do 3 minutes on, 1 minute off for 8 rounds. Whereas what the sprints and my kind of approach conditioning is, we're actually trying to create these adaptations to able the boxer to be able to perform the actions in the sport for longer, rather than just focusing on, a steady pace for 3 minutes and then have that 1 minute recovery or whatever it might be.
Well, that's the thing that people don't realize until they actually do some sort of combat sports training is it's not steady. You might have a whoa, and then suddenly it explodes into like just violence, and you don't have a choice but to keep up or you
Yeah.
get messed up. And
Yeah,
Sometimes people ask, "Why do I train?" And the weirdest explanation is in that moment, it's almost like meditation because if you're
yeah,
not locked in, you're gonna get caught,
mm,
and you can't
yeah,
think about your job, you can't think about your life outside of things. And I guess I prefer that challenge and that sort of meditative aspect as opposed to the whole namaste kind of yoga side of meditation.
yeah, yeah. I think I'd much prefer getting punched in the face, but each their own.
Um, so do you have any pet peeves in the industry?
I mean, I've kind of touched on a couple of them. Running, the overemphasis on running, the idea that if we're talking boxing specifically, the idea that strength training is going to somehow turn you into a bodybuilder. I think that's
Sure.
so. I think that's slowly changing. When I first started, there was probably more arguments around that, but yeah, I think that just comes from that old school mentality of when strength and conditioning probably was getting bigger for the coaches that would see strength and conditioning as a means of just turning someone into a bodybuilder. They probably grew up with, Arnie and those guys, and they saw them lifting weights and they were bodybuilders, and that's what turned them into bodybuilders. But they would probably be my biggest two things is, yeah, most, or not most, but a lot of older school boxers thinking that strength and conditioning is just for bodybuilding.
Mhm.
And yeah, the over reliance on running as a form of as a form of conditioning. It's yeah, I think it's slowly getting better, but it's going to be a long, long process of trying to convince people otherwise.
I think the bodybuilding thing is interesting because even in the gen pop world, not just the sports performance world, people think that the only ways that you should train is to go for a run to lose fat and to do bodybuilding to have a
Mm,
better looking body and all that stuff.
mm,
And then they think if you train like a bodybuilder, you can't be fast and athletic and mobile and all that stuff. Which, if
mm,
you only train like a bodybuilder, is true. We've seen some bodybuilders try to do athletic things. I'm not trying to like roast people, but if you got to see a video of Dr. Mike Israetel doing some performance testing, he did a broad
yeah.
jump like per foot, and it's like, okay, but you can also train multiple qualities like you do. You say vertical integration, all that stuff. People will say you can't ride two horses with one ass. You can, you just
Mm,
won't go as far.
yeah.
And so that's kind of like the goal of the coach is what qualities do you need to train? What do you need to prioritize at various points of the season? When you say you can't be, um, like a sprinter and a marathon runner at the same time because it's opposite adaptations. I kind of think that's a little silly sometimes because you see CrossFitters who can do like multiple different qualities at a high level, decathletes who can do multiple things. You have hybrid athletes that can run an ultra marathon and then squat 500 pounds. So I think training like a bodybuilder isn't the best way to train for sports. I'll say that right away. But it doesn't mean that you inherently will no longer be a good athlete. If you only do bodybuilding,
Mm,
then no more boxing. You'll be a trash boxer, right? But if you do some bodybuilding ish stuff, it's not inherently going to ruin team performance. Having said that, the way that you train, I think, is the smarter way to train for boxing performance because it's focused on the adaptations that you want directly correlated to your boxing performance as opposed to just looking the part and then throwing hands.
yeah. I think training like an athlete, I hate to say that, but doing all your plyos and your strength work, and if there is some hypertrophy, you will inherently end up looking like an athlete. I don't think you just have to train like a bodybuilder, even if that's like a secondary goal of like some of the boxers that come to me are like, their main goal is speed, power, strength, but they do want to look good and they do want to look at like an athlete. And inherently, if you train like one and eat like one, you're going to end up looking like one. And
Who'd have thought?
yeah, I think yeah, people have this thought that it just has to be bodybuilding or whatever it might be. But yeah, like I said, if you're training all those qualities, I think you're going to have the secondary effects of looking like an athlete. So it's yeah, it's funny.
I think it's interesting too because I think in sports sometimes, or depending on the sport at least, hypertrophy is almost demonized as a quality to train, and I find that within given context, it's totally appropriate and natural. It's very hard, yes, to improve relative strength and not gain size and all that stuff. I mean, it's totally possible, and yes, that can improve your power and performance. But it's really hard to get stronger and not build muscle in the process. They kind of go
Mm,
together. So
yeah,
I find that to be a little foolish, and also I think that targeted hypertrophy is good for armor building, and good for joint protection.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the word hypertrophy and building muscle in the context of boxing is very, very feared. I think honestly, a lot of boxers would get a lot of value of putting on a little bit of muscle, like you saw it with. I mean, Crawford went up a couple of weight classes, but he put on
Yeah,
some good quality muscle whilst maintaining all of his other qualities, his speed and power performance, and it obviously helped him win. Yeah, I think if more boxers actually spent some time developing a bit of muscle, obviously getting a lot stronger, their overall boxing performance would go through the roof. But that's not like, I think, again, going back to the bodybuilding thing, I think a lot of people think, especially boxers, that it's just super, super easy to put on muscle. But I mean, I've been training for, not that that has ever been a goal of mine to look really big, but for the last 14 years. And, you know, it is quite hard to put on muscle. Like it's not just an overnight process, or it's not just I'm going to walk into the gym and I'm going to become a bodybuilder. It takes some effort. And the other argument for that is that most boxers, when they go to work with a strength and conditioning coach, will probably be in a deficit. So it's going to be even harder to put on muscle. So, there's a
sure.
lot to argue to say that they're not going to be able to, or there's a lot to argue to say that they're just going to put on muscle because it's actually going to be quite hard to.
Yeah, the arrogance of people to think that they'll just one day lift a dumbbell and then slap on 10 pounds of muscle is the same as me
Yeah.
saying I can't make a piece of toast because I'll turn into Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah. There was a funny reel that came up on Instagram the other day. It's like, I drove too far. I was driving too fast or whatever, and then I turned into an F1 driver. It's like, you
Yeah,
got to
yeah, yeah.
specialize in these things to actually get really good at them.
Sure. On the flip side, are there any positive trends that you're noticing in the space?
I would say more boxers are actually taking up good quality strength and conditioning. More people are becoming interested in it and seeing the value of it. I think when I first started, it was an uphill battle trying to get people to do it and stick to a program. But I think the with social media growing and the more people that are getting exposed to the benefits of it, I think that's probably one of the positive trends of that more boxers are actually seeing the value in it. And you can see that from the highest levels like Usyk, Crawford, Davis, like all of these high level boxers are actually hiring very good strength and conditioning coaches. You'll see it on YouTube and they're getting some good value out of it. But previously it'd be like we said before, go chop some wood, go for a run. That was their strength and conditioning. So it's becoming less of an uphill battle to convince people to actually get involved in strength and conditioning, which is nice. It makes my job a whole lot easier.
Sure. I think social media is like a double-edged sword, and people always like to complain about, oh, I saw this stupid thing, I saw that stupid thing. There's all this confusing information, which there 100% is. But on the flip side, people are able to see more quality stuff, and I think people will not always know how to differentiate and filter and all that stuff. But I'm hoping that even if they get half right and half wrong, that there's more exposure to the good stuff, that'll have a good correlation to kind of myth busting and developing a better understanding of the industry and what it should be.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where the value of an S&C coach does come in. I get a lot of guys messaging me being like, can you give me some feedback on this program that AI wrote me or ChatGPT wrote me? And you're like, oh, Jesus. And sometimes it's absolutely terrible. And sometimes it's not too bad. I think that's kind of where the value of an S&C coach comes in because they can kind of sift through the shit and be like, yeah, this is actually going to do you good. This is not going to do you good because, yeah, sometimes they're absolutely terrible. Sometimes they're not too bad.
I find it kind of enjoyable when clients send me clips and it's like, is this good? Is this bad? Should we do this? Should we not do this?
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the fun parts about my job. And I don't always want to suck the joy out of something if someone finds it like cool, even if it's really stupid. So I try to be sensitive with my responses while also being honest and educational.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, depends who it
uh,
is. Sometimes my athletes send me the dumbest clip I've ever seen, and if they can take it, I'll just straight up be like, "Nah, that's shit." If they're not so that way inclined, I might just have to dial that back a little bit.
sure. Do you mind me asking if you get this question a lot? People want to do boxing specific exercises.
Mm. Uh, Not really. Most of the guys and girls I work with have either been referred to me or have followed me for a little bit, so they kind of know my approach and what I kind of prescribe in a program. the people that ask about the boxing specific stuff are usually the people that have never engaged with me and will just blindly DM me and be like, "Is this a good exercise?" Or, they'll send me their program and it's like banded punches or whatever it might be. So,
Bandit
I'm
punches,
lucky.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I'm lucky in the sense that most of the people that I work with already kind of had known my approach to S&C before we started working together. So there wasn't really that much convincing I needed to do from moving away from like sports specific stuff to just being, doing the general stuff pretty well and developing the specific qualities rather than the specific exercises.
I ask because I train a lot of golfers, and they'll ask for golf specific exercises all the time, and so
Yeah,
then I'll give them a golf specific rotation, like a cable rotation, as opposed to
yeah,
a baseball specific cable rotation. And I'm just like,
yeah.
all right, like, I'll
you
charge
just
double
you
and tell you it's golf
Yeah,
specific.
yeah.
So,
You just change the name in the app they're using and be like, yeah, golf specific wood shot.
yeah. So I wanted to thank you for your time. Do you have any final pieces of advice for literally anybody about literally anything, anything that you just feel like you want to share?
What do I want to share? What do I want to share? I guess just if you're thinking about doing a sport, get into it. Stop thinking about it,
Yeah.
especially if it's combat sport. Like, I mean, I was very intimidated when I got into jiu-jitsu. I mean, I said I hated it when I started with it, but enjoying it so much now that I'm going every single week. So I think if you're considering getting into a combat sport, just fucking do it.
I wanted to add on to that just a little bit. If you're thinking about doing it too, just go to the trial class. Don't think too much. Don't get yourself too worked up or anything like that. People generally will be nice to the trial guide unless it's some,
Yeah. Someone
some.
with an ego.
So, and
Also, don't
yeah,
have an ego if you're going to do a combat sport because everyone will find out and they'll
absolutely,
bash the shit out of you.
absolutely. And then the other thing too is you're going to be really bad for a long time. So count the small wins. And an example is, in the beginning, I saw success in my mind from if I was getting submitted less or if I was able to escape mount or side control more or something like that. It wasn't, oh, I'm submitting everybody in the class because that's not realistic to do in the beginning for jujitsu or something like that. It's just, am I getting beat up a little bit less or did I learn one new technique or something like that? So you have to try to make the small ones feel like big ones to be consistent with it because it's that first year or so is tough because you go in, you don't have social connections with people and they're all buddies already and you don't
Mm.
know this like secret language of a martial art or combat sport and they're beating you up and all that. So you gotta make the small ones feel like big ones to be able to survive
Yeah,
and yeah,
absolutely.
never
Yeah,
give up.
you can't be going in thinking you're gonna. I don't know. I mean, not that anyone's trying to knock anyone out of the gym or whatever it might be, but you got to take those small wins. I know I definitely, when I first started, you get kind of disheartened thinking that, you got to submit everyone or whatever it might be. But like you said, escaping mount or whatever it might be, you maybe are better at your jabs in boxing or better at slipping or you're better at defense, but you got to take those small wins when they come because it makes it far more enjoyable than, walking in there with a massive ego and then just getting bashed.
Sure, sure. Um, finally, if you were to plug yourself, your social medias, your programs, or anything like that, please go for it.
Yeah, just Handley Performance Coach on everything, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all the usuals. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.